Thank you, Chairperson, and good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for the wonderful privilege and platform to share a bit about child safeguarding. It's my passion. It comes out of actual events and instances where I had to face the whole issue of how safe are our children. And I hope that the information that I will share and the facility I'll make available later at the end of the presentation will be very, very useful to you. I've broadened the scope a little bit by saying that we'll be dealing with the priority of child safeguarding from an early age. So every child under the age of 18, obviously, according to our constitution, but in a dangerous society, an imperative initiative for the church. So I'm going to be approaching it from a church perspective. What can we do as the church? Because I firmly believe we're in the ideal position as a congregation in a community to affect great change when it comes to safeguarding of children. Next slide, please. I'm sure I can turn the slide as well. Yep. There we go. Just a quick reality check in terms of the issues that face our children. And I just selected a small handful of newspaper reports from different news agencies and so on, just to give us an idea, a taste. A lot of this you should know, but when we put it together, it really gives us a very difficult picture to face. Al Jazeera recently said that a total of 549 South African children are murdered in the first 6 months of the year 2022. That's last year. An average of 3 murders per day. And I really scratch my head and wonder, why would a person, an adult in particular, kill a child? What could a child have done to deserve death? And 3 murders a day reported is already a big eye-opener. In 2016, the first ever national representative study of child maltreatment in South Africa published that over 40% of young people have experienced some form of sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, or neglect at some point in their lives. Almost half of all of our children in South Africa, if not in the rest of Africa, have experienced firsthand some form of abuse. And then in 2022, a report on missing children. I'm just trying to get rid of the little thingy that's covering my screen here. Apologies for that. I'm trying to move it, else I can't read. I will go there. In 2022, a child is reported missing. That means kidnapped or abducted or trafficked every 5 hours. That's about 1,700 per annum. That a child is being kidnapped or trafficked. Trafficked is more the appropriate word because that's what most of the incidences are all about. And again, that's staggering to me. And there are reasons behind that. And it's another session all on its own just to look at child trafficking, which is becoming a very serious issue in our country. The Optimus National Prevalence Study and all of these reports are obtainable on the web. So if you Googled it, you will find them. It is estimated that 42% of South African children have experienced some form of ill treatment, and 82% have either experienced or witnessed some form of victimization, of which the largest part of that, the greatest percentage of that, happens in their homes. And then Matlabana, one of my favorite organizations, recently said that a child is raped in South Africa every 3 minutes. And by the time I'm done here, um, we're looking at another 8 or 9 would have been raped. That's the reality. And they're all between the ages of 8 and 12. These are not even teenagers. 90% of the cases, the perpetrator is known to the child. It could be a family member, it could be an uncle, it could be the neighbor that they know very well. And then lastly, a recent study has revealed that over 60% of children under the age of 12 had experienced pornography in South Africa. That means children have some level of exposure on the internet. As the one newspaper, the Times Live, has sort of summarized it in terms of having reviewed crime stats, simply puts it that children are under siege. And that's, I don't think I can put it any better either. I think children are getting a raw deal in our country, and there's just not enough focus and proactive action to ensure that they are far safer than what they are currently experiencing. I thought I'd just give one scripture. It's one of my favorites that speaks about children. And we all know Matthew 18 and the first few verses from there. But in summary, Jesus somehow elevates the importance and the stature of the child, saying to us adults, be like that child. Don't hurt the child. Don't treat the child badly. They already hold a key position in his kingdom. And it ends in verse 6 with a serious indictment. If anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. And so I really believe, even in the context of a church, certainly in the context of a community, the children should have the place of prominence. They should be given that place of honor, if I can call it that, and regarded as important citizens in our country, in our families, in our community. So what is safeguarding? And I use the term safeguarding more than anything else. We can use the word safety, and normally safety is dealt with in terms of the physical situation that the child will find themselves. And like at a school or a creche, health and safety has to do with the health and safety protocols that need to be in place. You know, there mustn't be holes in the perimeter fence. The kettle lead and so on must be out of reach of the children. That's health and safety issues. I'm not going to talk about that necessarily. We also talk a lot about child protection. Social development uses that extensively, but it largely deals with what happens when a child has already come to harm. But safeguarding covers both the responses that we need to take when a child comes to harm, but especially what can we do to ensure that a child does not come to harm in any way in the first place. So prevention is always going to be better than cure. I've done a few cases where I had to perform a child crimes investigation for a company in Durban called The Guardian. And when I looked at, and having also chatted with a number of social workers on the matter of, we get these cases all the time, but something has already occurred and the child has been harmed. What could we have done differently to have avoided that the harm had come to a child? And I can promise you, there will always be, you know, after the fact, obviously, there are things we could have done. So prevention will always be better than cure. We mustn't wait till it actually happens. We need to think about the situations where children find themselves and to ensure that those spaces are well managed. So Safeguarding is largely a preventative action or series of actions we will take. Now, our own constitution in South Africa has a Bill of Rights, and we are all covered as citizens of this country. We enjoy a series of rights. But in section 28 of chapter 2, it goes further and says, but children not only enjoy those rights, but have additional rights, like the right to education and the right to medical help and care, and a good home where they can thrive, and so forth. And then the one right that I think we are not dealing with well enough, which is every child has the right to be protected from maltreatment, neglect, abuse, or degradation. It's, we have the most wonderful programs and curricula and apparatus and so on at our schools, even in our Sunday schools, and so on at our sports facilities, etc. But the one thing we don't keep foremost in our minds is, are the children in our care during those times safe enough? And that's what proactive and preventative safeguarding is all about. The child's best interests are of paramount importance in any and every matter concerning the child. Comes from the Children's Act 2005. So I don't have the joy of clicking on my animation, but if you just looked at the picture on the far left, we have a constitution, and on the far right, we have the child. And in between, a constitution is administered by our government, our national government, provincial government, and so on. And government then institutes various pieces of legislation, like the Children's Act and so on, to ensure that those rights as enshrined in the Constitution is executed. Then we have the institutions, like the church, like schools and creches and sports. And I will mention these again and again because it's all the spaces where children will find themselves, where we as parents will take them at some point in their lives, and they'll move from one institution to another. All those institutions need to ensure that they comply with the law, and they need to know which laws would apply to the child. There are at least 17 pieces of legislation that speaks to the safety of children. It's important to know what each of those are. I'll give you one that I'm not really going to cover too much later, and it's, for example, the POPI Act. So the information about a child needs to be kept safe and private and not be distributed, like photographs, for example. So, and then we have the parents, and they have children, and far right is the child. But in the red square, everything in the middle, for the child on the right to enjoy their constitutional rights on the left, everything in the middle has to work together, else the child does not benefit at all. So keep the picture in mind. Let me click another one. The Children's Act 2005 speaks about the duty of care. And without getting into the full detail and legalities of it, it in essence says that we as citizens of the country all have the duty of care of any child, not only our own. And if we observe anything untoward, if a child is in danger, I caught two kids on a field playing with matches. And it's quite obvious if we allowed them to carry on, they might burn down the field, if not burn down their houses or even get hurt in the process. It's for us to step up and say, no, you may not play with matches on the field because you might get hurt. We have the duty of care to step up and speak out if necessary. If we witness that a child is being abused, we cannot stay silent on it. we have to report it to our South African Police Services, who has to then invoke all of the other agencies necessary to ensure that that scenario, that situation is taken care of. But we have to exercise the duty of care, and so I'm going to share some of the things that we can do. Let's start with 3 questions. I would ask any institution or any church, and in this case, I'm going to say to the church, as a church, how do I know? I'm a parent. How do I know my child will be safe when she is in your care for the hour on a Sunday morning, or if it's a school for the 5 hours my child will be on your premises? How do I know? What have you done to safeguard my child while she is with you? Now, either the answers are going to pop out very, very quickly. Yes, I've done A, B, C, D, and E. Or we're going to scratch our head and sort of, we have a security guard at the gate. No, that's not going to be the best answer for me. Okay. And so just take the question, what have you done? If any parent walked up to you and asked you the question, how would you respond? And it's important that you have your answers to that. The second question is, do you have a child safeguarding policy in place? It's a fundamental, it's a imperative document to have, which you've designed, constructed, signed, put in place, which aptly describes what you have done to prevent harm from coming to the child, or in the event that a child has come to harm in some way or another, then how would you respond to it? What would those protocols be? Okay, so do you have a policy in place that demonstrates your commitment as the management, as the organizers, as the coaches, as the pastorate, as the council, to safeguard the children in your care? Do you have a policy? Can I have a copy, please? Because it needs to be a public document. And then question number 3, are the leaders, the teachers, the caregivers, the volunteers, the overseers, the coaches, the trainers, and all the staff, including volunteers, by the way, that have to work with or be working near children, have they been appropriately screened against the sex offenders register and the child protection register as required by law? Of all the laws that deal with child safeguarding, only 2 are proactive. The others are after the event. There's only 2 that says this is what you have to comply with in order to ensure the safety of children. And it's these 2 registers that every person has to be screened against: the sex offenders register and the child protection register. Let me just sigh, if you don't mind. I struggle with this one, particularly in the church. And a lot of NGOs and so on, they are there to take care of the children and so on. But by law, they are not screened, which means they are not compliant with what the law mandates and requires. I want you to think about this question very, very carefully. And if you're already working with children and so on, and you haven't been screened, even although you know that you are not guilty, you've not been convicted in a court of law for any crime against a child, let alone have a traffic violation, fine not paid or whatever. No, you still have to, at least every 2 years, be screened so that your organization, your church, your institution, your employer is compliant with the law. Okay, it's a mandate on employers, not on the employee. And then, so those 3 questions, keep them in mind. Okay, so what is abuse? I don't think I can get into too much detail about this. We know what emotional abuse is, and making threats to children, getting them to do things, and so on. You're not being physical yet, but you are wearing them down mentally. For example, sexual abuse, we know, in other words, rape, or crimes associated with that of a sexual nature. Physical abuse, for example, excessive disciplining, beatings, etc. And then neglect, just not providing the care necessary for the child to grow and develop. But I've added a fifth one, which is not normally listed anywhere, and it is becoming quite a large phenomena, which is spiritual abuse. And I've actually seen this in action when an authority in the church getting involved with an abuse of a child. It might not be all of the above abuses yet. It could be one or more of them. But then they say to the child, please don't tell anybody about our secret, okay? Else God will punish you. Okay, so we use the Bible, and we sometimes use scripture to convince the child to follow what they want the child to follow. And it's worth studying up a little bit about spiritual abuse that sometimes is used to convince a child. So how does abuse happen? Now, in the context, again, of a church. And some churches, by the way, it's not only the fact that they have church services on a Sunday and so on. Many churches have creches and childcare centers and that as well. The principles that we apply applies to any situation where children may find themselves. In churches, we rely on volunteer help. We need volunteers to be teachers in our children's ministry and so on, and then youth leaders, etc. But churches often have large numbers of children, and in many cases more children than the few volunteers can handle, but they have weak abuse prevention policies. As I said, we've not even given this much thought, and we don't even have a policy in place. I've actually seen this in a church one day when the pastor asked, we need a grade 5 teacher. Anybody here in the congregation, during the announcements? We need a grade 5. Anybody wants to volunteer? And a lady raised her hand and he said, thank you very much. Come and see me on Tuesday. On Tuesday, she arrived at his office. He gave her the class notes and the curriculum. And on Sunday, she was in front of the class, the grade 5, teaching them. Okay, nothing else. There were no other questions asked and so on, no background checks, certainly no screening against any of the registers. Okay, because we need those volunteers. We have to consider, is the place safe for them? All right. And then we have lax screening procedures. Abuse can have a devastating long-term effect on anybody. The younger the child, the longer they will suffer the trauma, even when they get help. It stays with them. It's how our brains function. They might have witnessed something, or they might have been involved. They might have been a victim. It stays with them. It takes a long-term view of dealing with that, psychologically and otherwise. And so we have to consider, and if it's one child in a community, there's always going to be many, many more. And it has a community-wide, it can eventually impact many, many others, even if only one child has suffered as a result. Safer Spaces is a wonderful organization, international, and they have quite a presence in South Africa, has put together a statement on that the maltreatment of children can have a devastating effect, not only by the children themselves, but in society as a whole, because it impacts on their well-being and even life expectancy as they grow into adulthood. Abuse as a child is associated with many negative outcomes in adulthood, including poor social skills, abusive behavior, criminal behavior, mental health issues, substance abuse, lower levels of employment, and financial stability. All of these things are very, very prevalent in South Africa, as we know. Every newspaper report we open, we see this happening. Then where do we start? First, we must acknowledge abuse can happen in our institution as well. Okay, we have to face that reality. I've seen it happen, and I've had opportunity to investigate some cases that happened in a church. And then they should develop a child abuse prevention program. It's a series of activities and things that need to be done. The first being do the policy, and then make sure that all employees and volunteers are appropriately screened. I've given an idea as to the strategy. I mean, I said, the policy first and then your procedures. I'm just going quickly down them. I don't want to repeat them every time. And then the third one, only allow people with a proven track record. Don't be scared to ask about their previous employment, their previous associations with other institutions and so on. Get references and so on. Don't just employ. And then review the policies and that regularly. I say at least every year. Take another look at what has happened this year. Did our policy cover it adequately enough? If not, make the necessary changes. And then train and retrain everybody. Remember, the policy has to be at hand and available, not in a cabinet, 4-drawer filing cabinet, hidden away, but it has to be virtually in sight. Take aspects of the policy and create posters of it and post it on the wall or on the notice board. Then the advantages and benefits of vetting and screening, and I can't emphasize this enough. It provides a safer environment for children, free of the presence of predators and abusers. But the church will also be in compliance with the law, and that's what we want, to avoid possible prosecution. I can tell you that people are already from various government departments thinking about coming to investigate, to come and ask whether your compliancy is in place. Don't get caught out with not being able to show that you have the certificates of all the people working in your care. It demonstrates safe and effective child safeguarding prevention strategy implementation. It enhances the integrity of the church. You certainly don't want your church to get into any form of disrepute. Peace of mind is the bottom line, that you've done the best you can. And then appoint and train child safeguarding officers. I can give you access to a course on safeguarding, the training of, appointing someone that will take care of this. It doesn't have to be a full-time position, but it is a skill set that they're going to need in order to ensure they're the go-to persons. If anything happens about a child, that's the person we go to. And it is the one person the child will know that if they feel uncomfortable that somebody has been touching them inappropriately and so on, they go to the go-to person, which is the child safeguarding officer. But for me, the most important, and I'm going to highlight this for you, we have to train parents on how they can safeguard their children, especially when the children are not with them. So when they have to hand over the child to the grade R teacher or to the creche teacher or the Sunday school teacher or the coach or whoever's going to take care of their child, they have to ensure that they at least have done what they could to help the child to safeguard themselves. And for that, we will post a link to my online course on for parents, for them to train themselves. I'm almost at the end, Chairperson. Let me just pass this one. My theory of change starts with the leadership in the church. In the church, there are parents. Many of the parents are teachers and heads of organizations. If we do it in the church first and demonstrate and show those processes, this is what we have done. You can do the same, use the same models in our organizations. That's how we transform an entire community at the end of the day. Religious institutions are best positioned to make a community-wide impact in reducing child abuse. And I promise you, it can be done, and I've seen it being done. But it starts from within. And I hope that the church will take the lead big time, step up, do it internally. Don't preach about it and you don't know what it actually entails in your own institution. Do it first, and then you will have much to share about across an entire community. Madiba used to say, our children are our greatest treasure. They are our future. Those who abuse them tear the fabric of our society and weaken our nation. Our nation is very weak because we really haven't done enough. And I pray we at least will give this not only a lot of thought. I'm open to being approached at any time, and I will post my email. Please ask, and help will be given. I thank you, and God bless you. Thank you, Chairperson.